I was standing in my driveway at 6:30 in the morning when I realized my Salamander heater was gone. And I knew immediately that something very wrong had happened, because I had left it right there next to my work truck the night before. My name is Marcus Fitzgerald, and I run a small construction business in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had been working on renovating my own garage for the past 2 weeks, trying to finish the job before the winter really kicked in. The Salamander heater I had been using was a big industrial propane unit that I rented from Southwest Equipment Rental for $300 a week. The thing was essential for keeping the workspace warm enough to let paint and concrete cure properly in the cooler December temperatures. I walked around the side of my house twice, thinking maybe I had moved it and forgotten. But no, it was definitely gone. The propane tank was still there, sitting lonely on the concrete, but the bright orange heater that had been connected to it was nowhere to be seen. Then I noticed the note on my front door. It was printed on official letterhead from the Sunset Ridge Home Owners Association, and my stomach dropped as I read it. The note was signed by Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president who had made my life miserable since I moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago. The letter stated that they had confiscated my industrial equipment for violation of Section 12.7 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently prohibited the storage of commercial equipment in visible areas of residential properties. They claimed they had given me multiple warnings, which was complete nonsense because I had never received a single notice about the heater. The letter said the equipment was being held at the community center, and I could retrieve it after paying a $500 fine and submitting a formal appeal. I felt my blood pressure rising as I read the words again. $500 for a heater I did not even own. A heater I was paying rental fees on every single day it was out of the shop. I immediately called Southwest Equipment Rental. It was early, but they opened at 7, and I needed to let them know what happened before this turned into a bigger problem. The phone rang 4 times before a woman named Jennifer answered. Southwest Equipment, this is Jennifer. How can I help you? Hi, this is Marcus Fitzgerald. I have a Salamander heater rented from you guys, unit number 4732. I need to report that it was taken from my property without my permission. There was a pause. Taken, like stolen, sort of. My HOA seized it. They took it from my driveway and are holding it at their community center. I am going to get it back today, but I wanted to let you know what is going on. Jennifer's tone shifted to something more serious. Mr. Fitzgerald, that equipment is legally your responsibility until it is returned to our facility. If the HOA has it, you need to get it back immediately. We charge for every day it is out, and if something happens to it, you are liable for the replacement cost. That unit is worth about $4,000. I understand. I am heading over to the HOA office right now. I will have it back today. Please call us as soon as you have it secured. And Mr. Fitzgerald, if you cannot retrieve it through normal channels, you need to file a police report. That equipment is rented property, and taking it without your permission is theft. I hung up and grabbed my keys. The Sunset Ridge Community Center was only a 10-minute drive from my house, located at the front of the neighborhood near the main entrance gates. The building was a sprawling single-story structure with a pool gym and several meeting rooms. Patricia Hendricks ran the HOA board like a military operation from her office on the east side of the building. When I walked in, the receptionist, a young guy named Kyle who I had seen around the neighborhood, looked up from his computer. I need to see Patricia, I said, trying to keep my voice level. She took something from my property. Kyle's eyes widened slightly. Do you have an appointment? No, I do not have an appointment. She stole my equipment. I need to speak with her right now. Let me check if she is available." He picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it. After a moment, he hung up and gestured toward the hallway. "She will see you, first door on the right." Patricia's office was exactly what I expected. Immaculate, organized to the point of obsession, with filing cabinets labeled by year and category. She sat behind a large oak desk, her blonde hair styled in that specific way that suburban HOA presidents seem to favor. She was probably in her late 40s, wearing a cream-colored blazer that looked expensive. "Mr. Fitzgerald," she said, not standing up, "I assume you are here about the equipment removal notice. You took my Salamander heater from my property without permission. I need it back right now." She folded her hands on the desk. "The heater was in violation of HOA bylaws. We sent you 3 written notices over the past week. Since you failed to remove the commercial equipment, we exercised our right under the covenant to remove it ourselves. I never got any notices, not one. And you cannot just take things from my property. That is theft." Patricia's expression did not change. "The notices were delivered by our management company. If you did not receive them, that is not our concern. The equipment is currently in our storage facility. You may retrieve it after you pay the $500 fine and sign an agreement that you will not store commercial equipment in visible areas again. That heater is rented equipment. I do not own it. I am paying rental fees every single day, and the rental company is holding me responsible for it. You just created a legal nightmare for both of us." For the first time, Patricia's confident expression flickered. "Rented?" "Yes, rented. From Southwest Equipment Rental. I have the contract in my truck. That heater is their property, not mine. And you took it without permission from my private property. That is theft, Patricia. Actual theft." She sat back in her chair. "The HOA has the right to enforce its bylaws. We acted within our legal authority." "No, you did not. You do not have the right to take property that does not belong to me from my driveway. You do not have the right to seize rented equipment. I need that heater back right now, or I am calling the police." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Fitzgerald?" "I am telling you that if you do not return that equipment immediately, I am reporting it stolen. Because that is what this is. Theft." She stood up slowly. "The heater is in our storage unit behind the building. I will have Kyle retrieve it for you. But this does not change the fact that you violated HOA bylaws. You will still receive a formal violation notice, and if you continue to store commercial equipment on your property, we will take further action." "You do that," I said. "And I will be talking to a lawyer about what happened here today." Kyle appeared a few minutes later with a dolly, and we walked around to the storage unit behind the community center. The Salamander heater was sitting inside, thankfully looking undamaged. Kyle helped me load it onto the dolly and wheel it to my truck. As I was securing it in the truck bed, Kyle spoke quietly. "Hey, man, I am sorry about all this. Patricia has been on a rampage lately. She has been issuing violation notices to like a dozen homeowners over the past month." "Yeah, well, she messed with the wrong person this time." I drove home and set the heater back up in my garage, then called Jennifer at Southwest Equipment to let her know I had recovered it. She sounded relieved, but told me I should still consider filing a police report to document what happened, just in case there were any future disputes about the equipment condition or rental period. I spent the rest of the morning working in the garage, trying to focus on finishing the drywall installation. But I could not stop thinking about what Patricia had done. It was not just the inconvenience or the potential rental fees. It was the principle of it. She had come onto my property, taken something that did not belong to her, and then tried to extort money from me to get it back. Around noon, I took a break and called my friend Robert, who was a real estate attorney in Phoenix. I had known Robert since college, and he had helped me navigate the legal side of starting my construction business. "Marcus, hey, what is going on?" Robert answered on the second ring. I explained the whole situation. The missing heater, the HOA notice, the confrontation with Patricia, and the fact that the equipment was rented. Robert was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Did you take photos of the heater after you got it back?" "No, should I have?" "Yes." "Go do that right now. Document everything. The condition, the serial number, everything, and write down exactly what happened this morning while it is fresh in your mind." "Okay, but what do I do about Patricia and the HOA?" "Here is the thing," Robert said, and I could hear him shifting papers around. "HOAs have a lot of power in Arizona, but they are not above the law. They cannot just seize property from your driveway without following proper legal procedures. Even if you were in violation of the bylaws, which is debatable, they would need to go through the courts to actually remove anything from your property." So what she did was illegal. Very likely, yes. But here is where it gets interesting. The fact that the equipment was rented property owned by a third party makes this much more serious. The HOA did not just violate your rights. They potentially committed theft of property belonging to Southwest Equipment Rental. The rental company told me I should file a police report. I think that is a good idea, not necessarily to press charges, but to create a paper trail. If the HOA has been doing this to other homeowners, there needs to be documentation. And Marcus, I want you to send a formal demand letter to the HOA board. I will draft it for you. It will demand that they acknowledge what happened, reimburse you for any additional rental fees you incurred, and commit to not doing this again. You think they will actually respond to that? If they have any sense, yes. Because the alternative is a lawsuit that they will lose. And HOAs really do not like losing lawsuits because it comes out of the association funds, which means everyone's dues go up, which makes homeowners angry. I thanked Robert and hung up, then immediately went to take detailed photos of the Salamander heater. I photographed the serial number, the rental company sticker, the condition of the unit, and even took a video of it running properly. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote out a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. The next morning, I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department to file a report. I was not sure if they would take it seriously, but I wanted everything documented like Robert suggested. The officer who took my statement was a middle-aged woman named Officer Ramirez. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, taking notes on her computer. "So the HOA president came onto your property and took rented equipment without your permission?" she asked, clarifying. "Yes." "Well, I do not know if she personally did it or if she sent someone, but it was done under her authority. She admitted in her office that they removed it." Officer Ramirez nodded. "And you have the rental agreement showing that the equipment belongs to Southwest Equipment?" I pulled out the contract I had brought with me and showed her. She made a copy and attached it to the report. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I am going to file this as a theft report with a note about recovery of property. Technically, what happened here is theft. The HOA took property that did not belong to them without permission. The fact that you got it back quickly is good, but it does not change the nature of the act. Will anything happen to Patricia or the HOA? That depends on a few factors. The county attorney would have to decide if they want to prosecute. Given that the property was returned and the value, it is unlikely this would result in criminal charges. But having this report on file is important. It establishes a pattern if they do this to other people. I thanked Officer Ramirez and left with a copy of the police report. As I walked back to my truck, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize with a local area code. "Hello, Mr. Fitzgerald. This is Donald Chen. I am a homeowner in Sunset Ridge, and Kyle at the community center gave me your number. I hope that is okay." Sure. What can I do for you? I heard about what happened with your equipment and Patricia. Something similar happened to me 2 weeks ago. She had my boat trailer towed from my driveway while I was at work, claimed it violated the bylaws about oversized vehicles, cost me $400 to get it out of impound. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did you ever get any warning notices? That is the thing. She claims she sent them, but I never got anything. And when I checked my security camera footage, I never saw anyone deliver any notices to my house. I think she is making it up. Have you talked to a lawyer? I talked to one briefly. He said I could fight it, but it would cost more in legal fees than the $400 I already paid. So I just ate the cost and moved on. But now I am hearing she has done this to at least 5 or 6 other people in the neighborhood. This was bigger than I thought. Patricia was not just being overzealous. She was running some kind of operation. "Donald, I am working with a real estate attorney on this. Would you be willing to talk to him? If there are multiple people she has done this to, we might be able to do something about it." "Absolutely. I am tired of her getting away with this stuff." I gave Donald my attorney Robert's contact information and told him to reach out. Then I called Robert myself and filled him in on what I had just learned. "Marcus, this is good information." "Well, not good, but you know what I mean. If there is a pattern of behavior here, we have a much stronger case. Let me do some research on HOA law in Arizona and see what our options are." Over the next few days, more homeowners contacted me. Word had spread through the neighborhood about my confrontation with Patricia, and people were coming forward with their own stories. There was Margaret, whose lawn mower had been confiscated for being too loud during supposedly quiet hours. There was James, who had his work van towed despite it being properly parked in his own driveway. There was Sandra, whose children's playset had been dismantled by the HOA because it was supposedly too close to the property line. Each story was more infuriating than the last. Patricia had created an environment of fear in the neighborhood, where homeowners were constantly worried about minor violations leading to expensive fines or confiscated property. Robert set up a meeting at a local coffee shop for all the affected homeowners. 9 people showed up, including me. We sat around a large table in the back corner, and Robert explained the legal situation. "What Patricia and the HOA board have been doing is likely illegal on multiple fronts," Robert began. "In Arizona, HOAs do have enforcement powers, but those powers are limited. They can issue fines for violations. They can place liens on properties for unpaid dues or fines, but they cannot seize property without following proper legal procedures, which typically means getting a court order." "So she has been breaking the law this whole time?" Margaret asked. "It appears so. Now, here is what we can do. We can file a class action lawsuit against the HOA for unlawful seizure of property, harassment, and abuse of authority. That would be the nuclear option, and it would be expensive and time-consuming. Or we can start by sending a formal complaint to the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA behavior in the state." "What would that do?" Donald asked. "The Department of Real Estate can investigate HOAs for misconduct. If they find violations, they can impose fines, require policy changes, or in extreme cases, remove board members. It is a slower process than a lawsuit, but it is less expensive and often effective." We talked for over an hour discussing our options. Eventually, everyone agreed that we should start with the formal complaint to the Department of Real Estate, while Robert drafted a cease and desist letter to the HOA board demanding they stop their illegal practices. I volunteered to be the primary contact person for the group. Robert said he would work on drafting the complaints and letters, and we would reconvene in a few days to review everything before filing. That night, I got an email from Patricia. The subject line read, "Final warning, commercial equipment violation." I opened it with a sense of dread. The email stated that despite returning the Salamander heater, I was still in violation of HOA bylaws for operating a commercial business from a residential property. She claimed that my work truck, which had my company logo on the side, constituted evidence of commercial activity. She was demanding that I either remove the truck from the property or pay a $1,000 fine within 7 days. I immediately forwarded the email to Robert with the message, "She's escalating." Robert called me within 10 minutes. "Marcus, this is actually good news for us." "How is this good news?" "She wants $1,000 now. Because she is putting everything in writing. She is documenting her own misconduct. Save every email, every letter, everything she sends you. This is going to be important when we file the complaint." "So what do I do about the truck?" "Nothing. You are allowed to park your personal vehicle on your own property. The fact that it has your business logo on it does not make it a violation. She is making up rules at this point." The next day, I got a certified letter in the mail from the HOA attorney, a firm called Morrison and Associates. The letter was even more threatening than Patricia's email. It stated that I was in material breach of the HOA covenant, conditions, and restrictions. It demanded immediate compliance with all bylaws, payment of all outstanding fines totaling $1,500. Apparently, they had added more charges, and threatened to place a lien on my property if I did not comply within 10 days. I scanned the letter and sent it to Robert immediately. His response was terse. "Do not pay anything. Do not sign anything. I am drafting our response now." That afternoon, Robert sent me a draft of the cease and desist letter he was preparing to send to the HOA board, Patricia personally, and their attorney. The letter was 10 pages long and methodically detailed every illegal action the HOA had taken. It cited specific Arizona statutes that they had violated. It demanded immediate cessation of all harassment and threatened both civil and criminal action if they continued. The letter also included a section about the Salamander heater specifically, pointing out that the seizure of rented property constituted theft under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 13-1802, and that the police report I had filed was being forwarded to the county attorney for potential prosecution. "Robert, this is intense," I said when I called him after reading it. "It needs to be. They are not going to stop unless they are genuinely afraid of the consequences. And Marcus, legally they should be afraid. What they have been doing is serious." "When are you sending it?" "Tomorrow morning, by certified mail and email. I want to make sure they cannot claim they never received it." That night, I could barely sleep. Part of me was anxious about escalating things with the HOA. But another part of me was energized by the idea that we might actually hold Patricia accountable for what she had been doing. The cease and desist letter was sent the next morning. Robert told me to expect a response within a few days, either from Patricia directly or from their attorney. In the meantime, I continued working on my garage renovation. The Salamander heater was running perfectly, keeping the space warm enough to finish the painting. I had security cameras pointed at my driveway now, just in case Patricia tried anything else. 3 days after Robert sent the letter, I got a call from a man who identified himself as Gregory Morrison from Morrison and Associates, the HOA's law firm. Mr. Fitzgerald, I received a rather alarming letter from your attorney, Robert Chen. I wanted to reach out to see if we could resolve this situation amicably. That depends on what you mean by amicably, I said. I have reviewed the situation with the HOA board, and I believe there have been some misunderstandings about enforcement procedures. The board is willing to waive all fines against you and provide written assurance that your work truck is not in violation of any bylaws. What about everyone else? The other homeowners Patricia has been harassing. There was a pause. I am not authorized to discuss other homeowners' situations. Then we do not have anything to talk about. This is not just about me. Patricia has been illegally seizing property and extorting money from people all over the neighborhood. That needs to stop, and there need to be consequences. Mr. Fitzgerald, I understand you are upset, but filing complaints with the state and pursuing legal action is going to be expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. I am trying to find a reasonable middle ground here. Here is my middle ground. Patricia resigns from the HOA board. The HOA refunds every dollar of fines they collected through illegal seizures, and they implement new policies with actual oversight to prevent this from happening again. Otherwise, we are filing the complaint with the Department of Real Estate and pursuing every legal option available. Gregory Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I will need to discuss this with my clients. Can I call you back tomorrow? Sure. I immediately called Robert and told him about the conversation. He sounded pleased. They are scared. They know they are in the wrong. Keep the pressure on. The next day, Gregory Morrison called back. Mr. Fitzgerald, I have spoken with the HOA board. They are willing to refund fines to the affected homeowners. However, they are not willing to remove Patricia from the board. She was elected by the homeowners, and they feel it would be inappropriate to force her resignation. Not good enough. Patricia is the one who orchestrated all of this. If she stays, nothing changes. The board is willing to implement new oversight procedures. All enforcement actions would require approval from at least 3 board members instead of Patricia acting unilaterally. Would that be acceptable? I thought about it for a moment. I need to talk to the other homeowners. I will get back to you. That evening, we had another meeting at the coffee shop. I explained the HOA's offer, refund the fines, implement new oversight procedures, but Patricia stays on the board. The reactions were mixed. Some people, like Donald, thought we should hold out for Patricia's resignation. Others, like Margaret, were just tired of fighting and wanted to take the refund and move on. Here is the reality, Robert said, joining the discussion. If we push for Patricia's complete removal, they might dig in and refuse to negotiate at all. Then we go through months or years of legal battles. We might win, but it will be expensive and exhausting. If they are willing to refund the money and implement real oversight, that is a significant victory. But what stops Patricia from just finding new ways to harass people? Sandra asked. The oversight procedures would help. And more importantly, we will still file the complaint with the Department of Real Estate. That will be on record. If Patricia violates the new procedures or continues her behavior, the state will already have a file on her and the HOA. Future complaints will be taken much more seriously. After an hour of discussion, we took a vote. 7 out of 9 people voted to accept the settlement offer with the condition that the Department of Real Estate complaint still be filed. Donald and I were the 2 holdouts, but we agreed to go with the majority. Robert negotiated the final terms with Gregory Morrison over the next week. The settlement agreement included several key points. All fines collected through property seizures would be refunded with an additional $500 to each affected homeowner for inconvenience and distress. The HOA would implement new enforcement procedures requiring board approval for any property seizures or towing. The HOA would send a written notice to all homeowners clarifying the actual bylaws and enforcement procedures. And finally, the HOA would not retaliate against any of the homeowners involved in the complaint. The settlement was signed in mid-January. I received a check for $800, which more than covered the additional rental fees I had paid for the Salamander heater during the ordeal. But I was not done. Even though we had agreed to the settlement, I still filed my individual complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The complaint detailed everything that had happened with the Salamander heater, included the police report, and cited the specific statutes that Patricia and the HOA had violated. 2 weeks after filing the complaint, I received a letter from the Department of Real Estate confirming that they had opened an investigation into the Sunset Ridge HOA. They requested additional documentation, which I provided. Copies of all emails from Patricia, the original seizure notice, photos of the heater, the rental agreement from Southwest Equipment, and the police report. In February, an investigator from the Department of Real Estate named Linda Torres came to interview me at my house. She was thorough, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events, Patricia's behavior, and the impact it had on me and my business. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I want you to know that we take these complaints very seriously," Linda said as we sat in my living room. HOAs provide an important function in maintaining neighborhood standards, but they are not above the law. When board members abuse their authority, it undermines the entire system. "Have you talked to the other homeowners?" I asked. "I have interviewed 3 so far, and I have appointments with the others next week. I am also reviewing the HOA's financial records and meeting minutes to look for patterns of behavior. What happens if you find violations? That depends on the severity. We can impose fines on the HOA, require corrective action plans, mandate board training, or in extreme cases, recommend the removal of board members through a homeowner vote." Over the next month, I continued working on my garage renovation, which was finally nearing completion. The Salamander heater had been returned to Southwest Equipment without any issues, and the rental company had even given me a discount on my next rental as an apology for the situation. In March, I received a notice in the mail about a special HOA meeting. The subject was board restructuring and policy updates. I attended the meeting along with about 50 other homeowners, which was a much larger turnout than the usual 5 or 6 people who showed up to these things. Patricia stood at the front of the room, looking noticeably less confident than usual. Next to her were the other board members, Michael, the vice president, Karen, the treasurer, and Lisa, the secretary. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began, her voice tight. "As you know, there have been some concerns raised about HOA enforcement procedures. The board has been working with legal counsel and the Arizona Department of Real Estate to address these concerns." She went on to explain the new oversight procedures that had been implemented as part of the settlement. But then she said something I was not expecting. "Additionally, I have decided to step down as HOA president effective immediately. I will remain on the board as a regular member, but Michael will be assuming the role of president." There was a murmur of surprise through the room. Patricia would not make eye contact with anyone as she sat down. Michael stood up, looking uncomfortable. "Patricia has done a lot for this community over the years, and we appreciate her service. As president, my priority will be working with all homeowners to create a more collaborative and transparent approach to neighborhood management." After the meeting, several homeowners came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Donald shook my hand and said, "You did it, man. You actually got her out." "It was not just me," I said. "It took all of us." But the story was not quite over yet. In April, I received a call from Linda Torres at the Department of Real Estate. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We have completed our review of the Sunset Ridge HOA, and we found multiple violations of Arizona HOA statutes. The HOA has been fined $25,000, and we are requiring them to implement a comprehensive compliance program overseen by an independent third party for the next 2 years. What about Patricia specifically? That is the other reason I am calling. Based on our investigation, we found evidence that Patricia may have been diverting HOA funds for personal use. The amounts were relatively small, a few $1,000s over several months, but it is still considered embezzlement. We have referred the matter to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution. I felt a jolt of shock. I had no idea about that. I just thought she was power-hungry. Our investigation revealed that the fines she was collecting were not always properly documented or deposited into the HOA accounts. Some of that money appears to have gone missing. The homeowners who were fined may be victims of theft, not just illegal HOA enforcement. Wow. So what happens now? The county attorney will decide whether to file charges. If they do, there will be a criminal case. I wanted to let you know because you may be contacted as a witness. In May, I got a call from an assistant county attorney named David Park. He explained that they were filing criminal charges against Patricia Hendricks for theft and fraud related to her actions as HOA president. We believe she collected fines from homeowners under false pretenses and then pocketed the money instead of depositing it into HOA accounts. The total amount we have identified so far is about $18,000 over a 2-year period. That is insane. She was stealing from her own neighbors. It appears so. Mr. Fitzgerald, we would like you to testify about your experience with the Salamander heater seizure. Your case is particularly important because you documented everything so thoroughly, and you filed a police report right away. It helps establish the pattern of her behavior. I agreed to testify. Part of me felt vindicated that Patricia was finally facing real consequences. But another part of me just felt sad that it had come to this. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. There were preliminary hearings, motions, and negotiations between Patricia's defense attorney and the county attorney's office. I was kept informed of the major developments, but was not heavily involved until the trial date was set for September. In August, Patricia's attorney reached out to the county attorney about a potential plea deal. She was willing to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding jail time. The proposed deal included probation, restitution to the HOA and affected homeowners, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The county attorney's office contacted all the victims to get our input on the plea deal. Most people, including me, supported it. We wanted Patricia held accountable, but we were not interested in seeing her go to prison. We just wanted our money back and assurance that she could never do this to anyone else. The plea hearing was held in early September at the Maricopa County Superior Court in Phoenix. I attended along with Donald, Margaret, and a few other affected homeowners. Patricia stood before the judge, looking small and defeated in a way I had never seen before. The judge reviewed the charges: 3 counts of theft, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of abuse of fiduciary duty. Patricia pleaded guilty to all charges. "Miss Hendricks," the judge said sternly, "you held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors elected you to represent their interests and manage their shared resources. Instead, You abused that trust for personal gain. You stole from the people who believed in you. Do you understand the severity of what you have done?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. It was the first time I had ever heard her sound genuinely remorseful. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay full restitution of $18,400 to the HOA and affected homeowners. She was also permanently barred from serving in any HOA leadership position in Arizona. As we left the courthouse, Donald turned to me. "It is really over now." "Yeah," I said, "it is." But even after the criminal case concluded, there were still ripples from everything that had happened. The Sunset Ridge HOA underwent major reforms. Michael, the new president, worked with the homeowners to revise the bylaws, making them clearer and more reasonable. They established an appeals process for violations so that no single board member could act unilaterally. They hired a professional management company to handle enforcement issues, removing the personal dynamics that had allowed Patricia to abuse her power. My garage renovation was completed in October, nearly a year after the Salamander heater incident started the whole ordeal. I threw a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate, and over 30 people showed up. It felt like the community had finally healed from the division and fear that Patricia had created. As I stood in my driveway that afternoon, grilling burgers and talking with neighbors who had become genuine friends through our shared struggle, I thought about how differently things could have turned out. If I had just paid the $500 fine that first day, Patricia would have continued her schemes indefinitely. More people would have been victimized. The theft might never have been discovered. Sometimes standing up for yourself, even when it is inconvenient and uncomfortable, is the most important thing you can do. Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Donald walked over with a beer in hand. "Hey, Marcus," I was thinking. "You never did finish telling me about that garage renovation. How did the concrete floor turn out?" I laughed. "Come on, I will show you. Just promise you would not report me to the HOA if you see any code violations." "Deal." But only because Michael is way more reasonable than Patricia ever was. We walked into the garage, where the new epoxy floor gleamed under the LED lights I had installed. The walls were finished with fresh drywall and paint. The whole space had been transformed from a dingy, cramped storage area into a proper workshop. "This looks amazing," Donald said, genuinely impressed. "You did all this yourself?" "Most of it. I had some help with the electrical work, but yeah, it has been a long project." "Was it worth it? I mean, with everything that happened with the HOA and Patricia?" I thought about the question for a moment, looking around the space I had created. "You know what? Yeah, it was. Not just the garage, but everything that came after. We made the neighborhood better. We held someone accountable who needed to be held accountable. That matters." Donald nodded. "It does. Hey, I have been thinking about renovating my basement. Think you could give me some advice?" "Of course. That is what neighbors are for." As the afternoon turned to evening and the barbecue continued, I felt a sense of contentment I had not experienced in a long time. The fight with the HOA had been stressful and time-consuming, but it had also brought the community together in unexpected ways. People who had never talked to each other before were now friends. Homeowners who had felt powerless were now engaged and informed about their rights. The Sunset Ridge neighborhood was not perfect. No community is, but it was better than it had been. More transparent, more accountable, more focused on actual community building rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. In December, almost exactly 1 year after the Salamander heater incident, I received a check in the mail from the Maricopa County Clerk's office. It was my portion of Patricia's restitution payment, $842. Attached was a letter explaining that this was the first installment of her court-ordered payments, which she would be making monthly for the next 3 years. I deposited the check, and then did something I had been planning for a while. I wrote a check for the same amount to the Sunset Ridge Community Improvement Fund, which Michael had established to make actual upgrades to the neighborhood. New playground equipment, better landscaping at the entrance, and repairs to the community center that had been neglected for years. The gesture felt right. I did not need Patricia's money. What I needed was to live in a community that functioned properly, where neighbors looked out for each other instead of constantly watching for violations to report. A few weeks later, I saw Patricia at the grocery store. It was the first time I had seen her since the plea hearing. She was in the produce section, looking at apples, and she clearly saw me at the same moment I saw her. For a second, I thought she might just turn and walk away. But instead, she took a breath and approached me. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was different than I remembered, smaller, less certain. "I owe you an apology. I was not expecting that. Okay. What I did to you, to everyone in the neighborhood, it was wrong. I let the power go to my head. I convinced myself I was protecting property values and neighborhood standards, but really I was just being a bully. And the money I took, there is no excuse for that. I am ashamed of what I did." I studied her face. She looked older than I remembered, more worn down. The consequences of her actions had clearly taken a toll. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "It took a lot of courage to come over here." "I have been in therapy," she continued. "Court-ordered at first, but I am continuing it on my own. I am trying to understand why I did what I did, why I needed that level of control. It has been hard, but I think I am finally starting to see myself clearly. I am glad you are getting help. I mean that. I know I can never make things right completely, but I am trying. I am working 2 jobs now to pay the restitution. I quit the HOA board entirely, not just as president. I am just trying to be a normal neighbor now, a decent person." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. There was not really anything else to say. Patricia had done terrible things, but she was also a human being who was trying to make amends. That had to count for something. "Take care of yourself, Patricia," I finally said. "You too, Marcus, and congratulations on the garage. I heard it turned out beautifully." She walked away, pushing her shopping cart toward the checkout lanes. I watched her go, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at what she had done, satisfaction that she had been held accountable, and something like pity for the broken person she had become. But mostly, I just felt grateful that it was over. I finished my shopping and drove home, pulling into my driveway next to my work truck with my company logo proudly displayed. I walked through my garage, running my hand along the smooth wall as I entered the house. Everything was exactly as it should be. The next morning, I got a call from Southwest Equipment Rental. It was Jennifer, the woman I had spoken to that first morning when the Salamander heater went missing. "Hi, Mr. Fitzgerald. I am calling because we are updating our rental agreements and insurance policies. Your case with the HOA actually helped us identify a gap in our procedures for what to do when rented equipment is seized or stolen. We are implementing new protocols, and I wanted to thank you for bringing the issue to our attention." "I am glad something positive came out of it," I said. "Also, I wanted to let you know that if you ever need equipment from us again, you are getting our preferred contractor rate. You handled that whole situation professionally, stayed in communication with us, and got our equipment back safely. That is exactly the kind of customer we value." After I hung up, I realized that the Salamander heater incident had created ripples far beyond just my neighborhood. Southwest Equipment was changing its policies. The Arizona Department of Real Estate was paying more attention to HOA enforcement practices. The county attorney's office had a precedent for prosecuting HOA board members who abused their authority. One relatively small incident, a construction heater taken from a driveway, had exposed systematic problems and led to meaningful reforms. That afternoon, I met with Robert at a coffee shop to settle his legal fees. He had been incredibly reasonable, charging me far less than he probably should have given the amount of work he put into the case. "Robert, I really cannot thank you enough for everything you did. This could have turned out so differently." He waved off the gratitude. "Marcus, cases like this are why I became a lawyer. I do corporate real estate law most of the time, which pays the bills but is not exactly fulfilling. Getting to help actual people fight against actual injustice. That is what makes the job worthwhile. Still, I owe you. If you ever need any construction work done, I am your guy. Family and friends rate. I will hold you to that. My wife has been talking about renovating our kitchen for about 5 years now. We shook hands and parted ways. As I drove home, I thought about all the people who had helped make things right. Robert with his legal expertise, Officer Ramirez who took my complaint seriously, Linda Torres who conducted a thorough investigation, David Park who prosecuted the case, and all the other homeowners who stood together and refused to be bullied. Justice is not something that just happens. It requires people willing to stand up, document problems, and see things through even when it is difficult. In January, the Sunset Ridge HOA held its annual election for board positions. I was not planning to get involved, but several neighbors approached me about running for a board seat. I was reluctant at first. The whole ordeal with Patricia had left a bad taste in my mouth about HOA politics. But then, I thought about what Michael had said at that meeting back in March, about creating a more collaborative and transparent approach to neighborhood management. If I really believed in that vision, I needed to be willing to help make it happen. I ran for a board position and won by a comfortable margin. My first act as a board member was to propose and pass a policy requiring the HOA to carry insurance specifically covering wrongful enforcement actions. If the board made a mistake, the insurance would cover the costs rather than coming out of the general fund. It was a safeguard to protect both homeowners and the association itself. Over the next year, the Sunset Ridge HOA transformed from one of the most contentious in the area to something of a model for other communities. We were featured in a local news article about effective HOA governance. Other neighborhood associations reached out asking for advice on implementing similar reforms. The garage that I had been renovating during all of this became something of a neighborhood landmark. I started hosting weekend workshops there, teaching basic construction and home repair skills to other homeowners. It was my way of giving back, of using the skills I had to help build the kind of community I wanted to live in. 2 years after the Salamander heater incident, I was working in that garage on a Saturday morning when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Is this Marcus Fitzgerald?" "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Amanda Wilson. I am a producer for a podcast about HOA disputes and community conflicts. I came across the court records from your case with Patricia Hendricks, and I was wondering if you would be willing to be interviewed about your experience." I laughed. "A podcast about HOA disputes? That is really a thing. You would be surprised how many people are dealing with similar issues. Your case is particularly interesting because of how it escalated from a simple equipment seizure to uncovering systematic fraud. It is exactly the kind of story our listeners want to hear." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to just leave the whole thing in the past, but another part of me recognized that sharing the story might help other people who were dealing with abusive HOAs. "Sure," I said. "I will do the interview." The podcast episode aired 3 months later. It was titled, "The Salamander Heater That Brought Down an HOA President." Amanda had done an excellent job putting the story together, interviewing not just me but also Robert Donald, and even Linda Torres from the Department of Real Estate. After the episode aired, I got emails and messages from people all over the country who had similar experiences with their HOAs. Some were looking for advice. Others just wanted to share their stories. It was eye-opening to realize how common these problems were. I started a blog documenting best practices for dealing with HOA disputes, drawing on everything I had learned from my own experience. It was not anything fancy, just practical advice about documentation, knowing your rights, and when to escalate issues. But it seemed to help people, which made it worthwhile. 3 years after the incident, I was invited to speak at a community association conference in Phoenix. The topic was homeowner rights and HOA accountability. Standing at the podium looking out at an audience of board members, property managers, and homeowners, I felt a sense of purpose I had not anticipated. "My story starts with a salamander heater," I began, and then I told the whole tale. The seizure, the confrontation with Patricia, the investigation, the criminal case, and the reforms that followed. "The lesson here is not that HOAs are bad," I concluded. "The lesson is that power without accountability always leads to abuse. Whether it is an HOA, a government, or any other institution, there need to be checks and balances. There need to be consequences when people abuse their authority. And most importantly, ordinary people need to be willing to stand up and fight when something is wrong, even when it is easier to just pay the fine and move on." The speech was well received. Afterward, several board members approached me to thank me for sharing my story. One woman, probably in her 60s, shook my hand and said, "I have been on my HOA board for 15 years. I always tried to do the right thing, but this makes me realize we need better oversight procedures. Thank you for opening my eyes." That night, driving home from the conference, I thought about how far things had come since that December morning when I discovered my heater missing from the driveway. What had started as a frustrating inconvenience had turned into something much bigger. A lesson in standing up for yourself, the importance of community, and the power of holding people accountable. The Sunset Ridge neighborhood was thriving now. Property values were up, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because it had become a genuinely desirable place to live. People wanted to be part of a community that was well managed but not oppressive, that had standards but also compassion. Patricia had finished paying her restitution the previous month. I saw her occasionally around the neighborhood, usually walking her dog in the early morning. We would nod to each other but rarely spoke. She had rebuilt her life in her own way, working, doing her community service, and from what I heard, genuinely trying to make amends. I never forgot what she did, but I also did not hold onto the anger. Life is too short for that. 5 years after the Salamander heater incident, I was elected president of the Sunset Ridge HOA. It was not something I had planned or particularly wanted, but the other board members convinced me that I was the right person for the role. They trusted me to lead with the principles I had been advocating: transparency, accountability, and a focus on building community rather than enforcing compliance. My first major initiative as president was establishing a neighborhood mediation program. Instead of immediately issuing violations and fines when conflicts arose, We would first try to resolve issues through conversation and compromise. It was not always successful, but it reduced the adversarial dynamic that had characterized the HOA under Patricia's leadership. I also pushed for more community events, seasonal parties, neighborhood cleanup days, a community garden project. The goal was to give people reasons to interact with their neighbors in positive ways, building relationships that would make conflicts less likely in the first place. The garage where everything had started became the de facto community workshop. I kept it open most weekends, and neighbors would drop by to borrow tools, get advice on projects, or just chat. It became a gathering place, proof that a home was not just property to be managed and regulated, but a space for living, creating, and connecting. On the 5-year anniversary of the Salamander heater incident, I rented a Salamander heater from Southwest Equipment Rental, got the same unit by coincidence, and set it up in my driveway as a conversation starter for a neighborhood party. People got a laugh out of it, and it gave me a chance to retell the story for newer residents who had not been around when everything happened. As I stood in my driveway that evening, watching neighbors talk and laugh, kids running around playing tag, the smell of grilled food in the air, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what community was supposed to be. Not rules and regulations and enforcement, but people choosing to live together in a way that respected everyone's rights and dignity. The Salamander heater sat there, glowing orange, radiating heat on the cool December evening. A reminder of where we had been and how far we had come. Someone asked me if I was worried about getting in trouble with the HOA for having it in my driveway. Everyone within earshot laughed. That world, the world of fear and arbitrary enforcement, was gone. We had built something better in its place. As the party wound down and neighbors headed home, Donald came over one last time. "Marcus, I was just thinking. If that whole thing with Patricia had never happened, none of this would exist. This community we have now, it was born out of that conflict." I guess that is true. But I still would not want to do it again. No, me neither, but I am glad it happened. I am glad you fought back instead of just paying the fine. Me too, I said, looking around at the neighborhood I had come to love. Me too. The Salamander heater continued to glow in my driveway, its warmth spreading out into the night, a beacon of the fight that had transformed everything and the community that had risen from the ashes of corruption and abuse. It was just a piece of equipment, a construction tool designed to provide heat. But it had become something more, a symbol of standing up for what is right, of ordinary people demanding accountability, of the power we have when we refuse to be bullied. I turned off the heater and wheeled it into my garage, already looking forward to returning it to Southwest Equipment the next morning, on time and undamaged, just like it should be.